Conquest is the most unexpected yet satisfying addition to the Invincible TV series. Here's why. The moment we're introduced to Conquest is right after the fallout of the most catastrophic event in the series so far, the Invincible War. This brutal 3-day battle was orchestrated by one of Mark's greatest enemies, Angstrom Levy. His plan, to unleash alternate versions of Mark from different universes, ones where he had become evil, to annihilate the main timeline. In return, these Invincibles would gain new dimensions to conquer, and after the chaos unfolds, with his plan partly succeeding, Angstrom banishes the surviving Invincibles to an isolated dimension. Mark tracks down Angstrom and defeats him, bringing an end to the immediate threats. But while the battle is over, the destruction left behind is staggering. Cities lie in ruins, and Mark is left not only with the burden of rebuilding, but also with the crushing guilt of having caused so much death, even if it wasn't really him. Logically, Mark isn't responsible, but we know how he is. He's going to carry the weight of these losses, even though he shouldn't. In most stories, an event this catastrophic would serve as a turning point, a chance for things to slow down, maybe even a soft reset, but here, that was never an option. Long before the Invincible War, the Viltrumites had already assigned Mark the task of conquering Earth, and now, at the worst possible moment, they've come to check on his progress. Knowing his past resistance to their rule, they expected defiance. That's why they sent Conquest, the undefeated warlord, the unstoppable force meant to take over in case of Mark's failure or refusal. I bring up this moment again to emphasize just how jarring Conquest's arrival was, because that shock factor plays a huge role in establishing just how terrifying he truly is. Whether terrifying or hype-inducing, Conquest's arrival is immediately chilling. The way he simply hovers above Mark, barely acknowledging him, establishes his dominance in an instant. And when he dismisses Mark as nothing more than a worm, the message is clear. This is a whole new level of danger. From the moment Conquest appears, it's obvious he's leagues beyond any opponent Mark has ever faced, including the alternate versions of himself. We've seen Mark struggle against Viltrumites before, and it never ends well. It doesn't take a genius to realize Conquest, being much older than most of his kind, is an even greater threat. This fight doesn't seem winnable. The moment feels like stumbling into a secret boss battle in a video game, the kind that kicks off before you're remotely prepared. Mark himself acknowledges the timing couldn't be worse. He's barely recovered from the Invincible War, and now he's facing something far beyond his limits. But despite everything, he welcomes the challenge. Without hesitation, the two clash. At first, there's a brief back and forth, just enough to tease the idea that Mark might finally be ready for the big leagues. But Conquest quickly proves why his name is legendary. He completely demolishes Mark. For 2 brutal issues, Mark is beaten down without mercy. Even with the help of Oliver and Eve, they never stand a chance. Conquest is simply too strong, too ruthless, far beyond anything Mark has survived before. And when they're finally cornered, with Eve seemingly gone for good, Conquest believes he's already won. But then, Mark delivers one of the hardest lines ever. I don't care how strong you are. I don't care how fast you are. I can see the future you don't live to see tomorrow. As much as I love this quote from the fight, there are so many others that hit just as hard. You can't help but remember them all. This entire battle is packed with unforgettable lines from both Mark and Conquest, making it impossible to forget. But what makes these moments even more powerful is the sheer effort behind every punch, every struggle, every second of this brutal fight, especially for Mark. At a certain point, every hit he lands probably hurts him more than it hurts Conquest, but he doesn't stop. Even when his eyes swell shut and he can't see, he keeps fighting. Even when his entire body is restrained, when his strength is completely drained, he still refuses to quit. And through this, we see the fundamental difference between Mark and Conquest, between Mark and all Viltrumites at this stage. Mark isn't driven by the same love for battle or thirst for domination that fuels his people. His motivation is entirely different. He fights not because he enjoys it, not because he was made to. He fights because he has people to love, people to protect. Every move he makes in this fight is fueled by desperation, because he understands that if he loses here, everyone loses. Mark cares about others more than he cares about himself, and that selflessness is what pushes him past every limit. That's why I've always seen this battle as the conclusion to Mark's first major character arc. It takes everything he's been through, every struggle and moment of growth, and forces him to prove it. Had he been any weaker, had he cared even a little less about the people around him, or lacked just a fraction of his willpower, this fight would have ended very differently. And I think that's another reason why Conquest is such a beloved character. He doesn't just deliver a brutal, high-stakes battle. He pushes our protagonist, someone we've followed and rooted for, to his absolute limit. And when Mark finally overcomes him, we're left with the undeniable truth. Mark has grown. Conquest does everything a great villain should in his first appearance. He arrives like a secret boss, a sudden, terrifying force who seems unstoppable, only to be technically defeated by Mark. But thankfully, that wasn't the end of his story. Not even close. Shortly after their first encounter, Conquest makes his return. We learn that Cecil had secretly recovered his body and deceived Mark into believing he was dead. Hidden away in a classified government facility, Cecil interrogates what remains of Conquest, hoping to extract valuable information about the Viltrumite Empire. At this point, Conquest is nothing but a severed head, but he's a Viltrumite, and we're quickly reminded what that really means. In a single page, while the story is focused elsewhere, Conquest regenerates, breaks free, and escapes. This moment is terrifying. The second you see it happen, nothing else in the story matters. Conquest taking one glance at Earth before flying off is a haunting image that lingers in your mind, because now we know. We've already seen what Conquest alone is capable of, and this time he's coming back with reinforcements. We had already witnessed the devastation of the Invincible War, but now an entire army of even stronger Viltrumites was coming. And the terrifying part, no one but Cecil had any idea. This was a brilliant way to keep Conquest lingering in the reader's mind. Even when he wasn't on the page, we knew he'd return. The only question was when. Thankfully, in the comics, we didn't have to wait long. The story hurtled straight into the Viltrumite War at breakneck speed. As our heroes made their way toward Viltrum aboard a spaceship, disaster struck. Before they could even get 2 pages into their journey, something smashed straight through their ship, obliterating it in an instant. As Mark scrambled to find his father, he was greeted by a nightmare, none other than Conquest. His only response, number not him. Taking the words right out of our mouths. Mark had already beaten Conquest once, but he knew how hard that battle had been. It was his greatest challenge, his most brutal fight, and now, not even 10 issues later, he was facing him again. And this time, it was even harder. Their rematch kicked off in space, with Conquest thrilled to battle the only man who had ever put him down. Unlike their first fight, this one started out as an even exchange. Mark was stronger now, and it showed. But when Oliver began suffocating, unprepared for combat in space, Conquest took advantage of the distraction and went after him. Mark had no choice. He lunged at Conquest, wrapping his hands around his throat, realizing that an all-out brawl wouldn't work this time. He had to end this fight another way. The struggle reached its brutal climax when Conquest ripped out Mark's stomach, but Mark, refusing to go down, kept choking him out. In the end, he succeeded, finally putting Conquest down for good. Of course, Mark didn't walk away unscathed. The sheer damage he had taken was enough to knock him unconscious, leaving Oliver and Nolan to carry him to a nearby planet for recovery. Somehow, this rematch was even more savage than their first encounter, delivering an unforgettable conclusion to Conquest's arc. All in all, despite his relatively short time in the Invincible comics, Conquest did it all. He pushed Mark to his absolute limit, delivered some of the most unforgettable and badass quotes in the series, and left a lasting impression on fans years after his exit. Even though his appearances mainly served to move the story forward, he still managed to stand out as a one-of-a-kind character. Honestly, it makes me wish Invincible had a Marvel or DC-like structure, just so we could see more of him. But maybe that's part of what makes him so special. His short run forces us to cherish every moment he was on the page. With that said, I'd love to hear your thoughts on Conquest. Drop your opinions in the comments, and if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and subscribe. I'll catch you all in the next one. Peace out.